Okay, for fear of getting repetitive, today we've got another resin review.
Gruffy Crow.
So, Sunlu again. They sent me this one as well. 3 filters. As ever, many layers of packaging. This time, we're looking at the water washable. I've never used a water washable resin in all the time I've had my printer. I'm a bit sort of dubious about them. I've seen various bad reviews, especially with them sort of cracking potentially, all sorts of issues. So I've always just avoided it. Using IPA has never been an issue for me. Given the chance to try it out, I thought, why not? And also, I'm really starting to kind of trust Sunlu for my resin. So might as well find out how it is. I've loaded up the printer with quite a complex tray, and including, learning from last time, some cones of calibration, so I can see if my standard settings work or not, or if we need to make some tweaks. But we're still going in hard with this busy loadout anyway. Okay, let's see how the first print has turned out. It looked good from the get-go. The support material is, so remember this is before it's had its final cure, but it's still very flexible, but probably more brittle than some of the other ones we've tried, but certainly not a problem. Yeah, stiffer than the toughness resin for sure, so that was a good sign from the get-go when we're moving off there, and they came off the supports quite nicely. So even on the bottoms here that were just held up by the supports, that's quite smooth. The other supports on the models are removing quite easily. I am noticing this is a chunk more brittle than the ones we've been using, so we'll find out how that goes. One of the models we printed was this girl, and she does have a sort of dangly bit. Once again, the model appears to have printed fine. We just used water in the tank to clean these, nothing else, left them in for my sort of normal time, and they appear to be pretty clear and clean. It was actually really weird using water to clean these. It just felt really wrong. Obviously I'm used to the smell, and there's generally a sort of general stickiness to the models when they come out, and just, yeah, it's quite a different experience having this water washable. I mean, if these models work and nothing goes wrong with them, and they're not too brittle or anything, I think I might be a convert to it, to be honest. The detail looks fine, but we'll run some more tests for that. But yeah, these look absolutely spot on. Obviously we did the cones of calibration again on this one, and they appear to have printed exactly how I'd expect. These two are still joined up, so we could probably reduce the time actually and actually speed these up a little bit, and still get good prints. So these might even be a bit over exposed, so that's quite useful to know. So yeah, the next print we'll try just taking the time down a little bit, I think. But these certainly don't look overexposed. There's not any loss of detail as far as I can see, so that's good to know. We've got some multi-part pieces here. Oh, I think I'm missing a forearm though, but where that notch fits in to there, that is spot on. It's connecting perfectly, so that's good. Oh, there we go. I don't know when that happened, but yeah, we lost the ball and chain off the girl there. Funnily enough, this is a digital conversion, and the sculptor of the original did actually more or less say that was going to exactly happen to me. Turns out he definitely knows his business. Just the thinness of that chain, I think that was bound to happen on anything but that toughness resin probably. We still have another sensor at the back there, so I'll probably just carve down that a little bit and just call that fine. I'm going to do another similar print of some other bits that I want at the moment, and then we'll test some detail and paint and glue and all of those other good things when we've got the next print sorted out. Okay, so we've had another successful print, and there's another one on the way, and with the bunny herder here, I've kind of proved that the glue works. This guy is based at a sort of pretty wonky angle onto this base, and that is holding nicely, and the staff and the rabbit were all separate. Another thing I noticed putting this guy together is all the little notches. Sometimes I have trouble getting those all to line up, and that appears to have worked perfectly. and that was really seriously reducing the time. So this stuff prints quickly, and the level of detail on this guy is crazy. All the texture in his rabbit fur, and if I can get him close enough, you'll see there's a little belt buckle in there and stuff that's picked out perfectly. No problems with the back either. I will say this is definitely more brittle than what I've been working with recently. It's just a spare part off that guy in case I didn't want to use the staff. It's pretty robust actually, but you don't get anywhere near the flex. I don't think even as you would on the ABS, and certainly not on the toughness. And I have snapped a couple of bits by accident. But I think as soon as you move up to something this sort of thickness, actually that's actually easier to snap almost. And you can see it's kind of sheared and shiny, which is something we weren't really seeing on some of the ones I've been doing recently. But then the body of this isn't going anywhere. I think it's a little bit less brittle. Now I've brought the exposure down a little bit, which makes sense. So I've got a few more bits on the printer now, and we'll take a look at them. Okay, so this is the last plate I'm pulling off the first litre of this resin, and you'll see how easily these come off here. They're still a bit wet because they've just come out the wash machine, but I'm less worried about handling these as I would be if that was alcohol. But as you can see, yeah, they come off the supports really easily. But compared to the supports from the toughness resin we were using a few days ago and weeks ago, this is very brittle. Another reason why I wanted to show you this whole plate as it came off the printer, I literally just knocked it off the plate, is just some of the stuff that I can do with this. There's a lot of the sort of Elegoo resins and other resins where I wouldn't trust just to be able to have this little shotgun just on a few little supports and have it print absolutely perfectly. Like this one's just balanced on a few there. And that's printed fine. I like this little pistol here. What's that? Four little supports. That's all that's holding that on. And it's printed absolutely perfectly. So it is a very reliable resin, this. And as I said, I genuinely do pack my plates out quite a lot. And we've got things like bases here. And these have printed, I said, at 45. And they're nice and round. They've kept their shape, which is a problem I've had before with printing shapes like this. It's a very reliable resin. I've not had any problems with it warping or changing shape. And the details are still fantastic. But yeah, so not only are the models easier to clean, but also just everything else. Things like this plate, obviously this has had years of regular resin sort of dropped all over it, and it's impossible to get perfectly clean. Whereas I think with the water washable, that would just clean straight off. The side where I normally process all this stuff is, once again, so I wouldn't normally process stuff on here at all because you're always going to end up with a little bit of dampness, and that, if that was the alcohol, would stay quite sticky. Whereas I'm confident that I could just run a cloth over this. Worst case scenario, run a bit of cleaner over it, and it'll be absolutely clean. So it's made the whole process that little bit less messy and smelly. And as you can see, I've been printing absolutely buckets of stuff with this, way more than I can fit in shot here, and a bunch of stuff like those worms are already painted and off in with the rest of the army. And here you can see some sprayed models, and you can kind of see the real nice level of detail. Can't fault it at all for the detail. We've got this fella here from Reptilian Overlord. Once again, just insane crisp details. Possibly the crispest one so far. Let's have a look at our little cultists here. So that is the regular Sunlu, ABS likes, I should say. This one with the super bendy daggers is the toughness. I think I decided that was ever so slightly crisper. And then we've got the water washable. Once again, you can see on the back of this guy, little to no marks from the supports. But yeah, I think this is definitely equivalent, if not slightly better, than the regular ABS like. It's really hard to decide. Obviously these ones have had an undercoat now as well, so it kind of makes the details pop a little bit better. I would say possibly a little bit softer than the toughness, but as I said, I had a bunch of concerns with the toughness for printing miniatures. But one of the concerns I didn't have was how strong they were. Now the reason I have two of these captains is because while I was tidying this one up and just clearing off some brew marks and everything, I managed to snap. He's got this sword sticking out here. I managed to snap that off, and I was being quite gentle at the time. Also, this guy was just minding his own business on my desk, and he managed to lose an arm. Look, it's fractured, really shiny in there. So this was glued in, so it's snapped just on the arm rather than the glue joint. And what should be a fairly firm attachment, but something's just caught the top of this gun and snapped it off. And here is another version of the plume. I broke this one getting it off the supports, and as you can see, it's quite brittle. And I think from my cones of calibration and what I've sort of looked into, I've got it dialed in right. I don't think I'm overexposing it or underexposing it. I've had resin this brittle before, just not for a while, and it's fine. I'm being, brutal with it. For tabletop gaming, I think these are going to be fine. I've printed them out again and got all the supports away without any problems. And I've also found that a spray undercoat firms up some of these smaller little details and things. And I shouldn't really be putting that kind of pressure on these, but I do tend to drop things quite badly. So I said, although this resin is probably suitable for making stuff like this, it probably wouldn't be my choice. I'd probably rather have something a bit more flexible, something with a bit more bounce. It's just quite brittle. I do have to put a bit of force there, but that's just something I wouldn't be able to do with the other resins. Now I'm being picky here, as I said. It's fine, and once you get to the sort of torso like that, there's just no way. But as I found out, once you get a bit more weight on things, it can cause more problems, like I had with my lighthouse video. Those things were a similar level of brittleness on the resin. As soon as you got those big chunks, any kind of drop was a little bit more disastrous. One of the other negatives I've heard about water washable was making things hollow. Now, when I make things hollow, I tend to put these massive, massive holes in them, so we can get plenty of sort of rinsing in there. And there was holes in the back there, you can see, and then there's these holes here, and even some holes here. Now, they're partly to aid the printing, so there's no suction. And once this is on the table, obviously, you're never going to see the bottom. So I'm not worried about filling it full of holes, big or small. I've also printed this. This is a massive chunk of resin, and as you can see, if you catch the light through it somehow, anyway, it's completely hollow in there. So that's a sort of thin mesh. You should be able to see maybe the mesh through the edges. If I had a light, I'd be able to shine that through. I can hold it up to the window and see straight through one mesh to the other. But once again, no problem with this. I did print this flat on the plate as well to try that, and it printed fine. There was a couple of little sections where, completely without supports, where it sort of delaminated a bit in the printing, where it was completely flat and it couldn't quite hold itself up. And there was a little bit on the inside of this roof as well that was like that, but the outside's fine. And because the exposure rate was quite low, printing something even this big was quite quick. And this is a solid chunk. I didn't bother hollowing this, but just another example of the sort of level of detail. And I said it's a relatively brittle resin, but I'm not going to have any worries about, I don't think, about accidentally knocking these bits off. I think you can have something detailed like this and not worry about it. Once again, this has had a blast of undercoat as well. Another thing is with some of the other resins I've used, this is fit together really nicely. Obviously, it's designed quite nicely. There is actually a join there, as you can see. But it actually fit just perfectly. Like, this cable fit in the right place. I think it's a better example is this model here. This back part fit really snugly, so snugly you can kind of see how close it is in that hole there. This little engine section fit really nicely into a little slot there. Oh, this one had wheels that slotted on and they fit just really perfectly. So out of all the resins I've used, this has probably got the least sort of shrinkage and warpage, which I think somewhat accounts for its really nice detail. I've also had no problems gluing it, which I said is handy, seeing as it is relatively brittle. But once that glue sets, I don't think that arm's going to break in the same place twice. The glue does seem to hold this stronger than the resin itself, which is generally the case with printer resin anyway. I've had some where the glue's not taken quite so well, but not this one. I've also printed some quite delicate miniatures and not managed to smash them up. These guys are obviously just rested on these little posts. These are imitation of life again, but one of my own sort of kit bashes with the heads. Oh, and the little logos on here. And once again, this is entirely hollow underneath, but you can't see that because this is stuck to a base, and it's just proving that the paint's all good. Not any problem with paint on these. So I think at this point I can safely say, you know, I've given this pretty much every test I can think of, and in general, I like it. I like it as a resin. It files nicely. One of the problems I had with the toughness resin is that you couldn't just file it with an emery board quite as nicely as this. Whereas I suppose that's something to do with the hardness and the brittleness. Means it files really nicely, so we can knock off those edges on our bases quite nicely. The details are perfect. Like, I think that's about as good as my printer can print. But as you'll see when I move this support, it is super brittle, which I think is fine. I mean, something like a miniature like this, I wouldn't worry about that ever. And stuff like this, even less so, though I wouldn't want to drop it onto a hard floor. And I think if you were worried about how messy 3D printing is, this is certainly a way that you can reduce that, because as I said, regular cleaning products and just some tissue paper seem to be way better at clearing this up than when with regular resin. And as I've said before, people say that resin printing smells. I don't think the actual resin does, but the alcohol is the big thing that smells for me, and which is obviously not a concern with this. But downsides, I would say it's probably too brittle for me to use as my everyday resin. I'm not a convert to water washable just yet, because despite the fact there are regular resins that are just as brittle as this that I have used and liked before, now I've got used to using the sort of nice ABS-like, especially the Sunlu ABS-like that doesn't seem to compromise on the details either. I don't really want to go back to using something that's a little bit more brittle. So going forward, I'll probably keep using the Sunlu toughness mix as long as I can still find that. But I think that says more good about those than bad about this one. And I think it would just come down to preference. I'm not saying this is terrible. Just that little bit more brittle than I would ideally like. And unlike some other resins, it's not like I can mix something in with that to improve it, because then it wouldn't be water washable anymore. But if you think I'm doing something wrong, or you'd like to see me try something else with it, just let me know down in the comments. And Sunlu guys, if you're watching, thanks for letting me try it out. And also, if you've got anything else you'd like me to try, feel free to send it my way.